Good evening, everyone, and welcome so much. Why don't we just take a moment and thank Becca for providing music this morning for us. She's blossoming right in front of us, as she begins to do more and more here, so it's very nice. I want just to thank you so much for gathering tonight and taking this time of Sunday and in your week to do some Advent preparations and the like. We've listened to John the Baptist this weekend in the Masses with the gospel story, and I'm like an insight from Meister Eckhart. He was a Dominican friar priest, and he says, in the end, what good is it if Christ is born in Bethlehem if he's not also born in our own hearts? And I think that's very insightful, right? It's a wonderful thing to remember 2,000 years ago what happened historically. But the whole purpose of that was so that he would be born in us. And so by you being here this night, you are trying to make yourself available, open to the possibility of this in a deeper way. And I want just to compliment you and affirm you in that. So thank you so much for that. We are making this, trying to make Advent special this way by having our first guest speaker like this for the season. We've initiated our On the Journey small groups. We did not have a video and gathering as small groups during this month, so that instead we would gather all together as a larger parish community in this regard, in addition to just an open invitation to the parish. So I'm grateful that you're here and doing this. We do have childcare, if that's necessary. If you've got little ones from 2 years old to 8 years old, they're in the social level. We are prepared to help take care of them there. All right. So really, in many ways, Deacon Omar doesn't need an introduction. He's been involved in the diocese and worked intimately with Archbishop Lucas, I think almost from the very beginning, and then worked in the Chancery Office, and now is the President and Executive Director of Evangelium Institute. He's known by a lot of people just by being a gifted teacher, speaker, where he can help us grasp insights from our tradition in a way that inspires us and makes it sound fresh and new. So I'm very grateful, Deacon Omar, that you are here tonight. He's a deacon of our archdiocese. He's a married man, has children, so he understands that side of things, understands the clerical side of things. So I look forward to what he has to share with us as we strive to grow in our own holiness this Advent season. So please warmly welcome Deacon Omar Gutiérrez.
Well, good evening, everybody. I have so many friends here. I didn't realize how many until I started seeing you all come in. So good to see all, so many of you. So first, thank you to Father Tom, and thank you to Marlo and everybody who organized this. Thanks to Becca with her beautiful music. I'm going to just give an instruction about maybe how to receive this evening, and then get into some of the content of my talk. So the purpose of this evening is for you all, and I'm sort of a facilitator, but really hopefully the Holy Spirit's going to speak to you. So you may find yourself sitting there really annoyed with me. You might be sitting there and saying, boy, this guy likes to talk a lot. Just constantly going on and on and on and rambling. He clearly thinks very much of himself. He's a know-it-all and everything. And as you're sitting there and your mind is wandering, you're thinking of your Uncle Bob. Let's say Uncle Bob was the same way, kind of a jerk. Nobody wanted him to come over for Thanksgiving dinner. And you're thinking about Uncle Bob and what annoying he is. And then that gets you to think about Aunt Susan, who was married to Uncle Bob and is a saint because of that. But also Aunt Susan was, just a very faithful person, very caring, and then that reminds you that Aunt Susan was your confirmation sponsor, and that you liked having conversations about the faith with Aunt Susan, and then all of a sudden you're thinking about your confirmation and how that was the last time you really felt really close to Jesus. And then all of a sudden you're having a moment. And you're thinking, oh, I missed that relationship. I miss Aunt Susan. And I want to feel close to Jesus again. All because you find me annoying. Yeah, it can happen that way. So I just want to give you permission this evening to stop listening to me. If you're listening to me and I say something and it stirs something in your heart, we'll talk more about that later, stop listening to me and just pause and talk to the Holy Spirit, talk to Jesus, receive whatever it is the Holy Spirit is trying to give you. So that's the first instruction. Secondly, just a little bit about myself as a kind of lead up and explanation as to what I'm going to talk about and why I'm talking about it. So I'm aware that some of the jokes tonight have been heard by many of you several times, so I apologize for that. But I'm a first-generation American. My parents are from Latin America. My mom from Costa Rica. My dad from the Dominican Republic. They met in Michigan, obviously. Thank you. So that's new for some of you. Okay. And they had a difficult marriage in lots of ways. We don't need to get into too much of that. But one of the ways it was difficult was my dad was a communist atheist. Fidel Castro was his hero. And my mom was a Latina devout Catholic. I mean, like Latina, with the rosary around the neck and the many images of Our Lady of Guadalupe, praying in tongues for parking spots. That was my mom. That's a true story, by the way. That happened many times. Okay. So when I was growing up, trying to figure out what it meant to be Catholic, if I was going to be a Catholic, I wanted to have some reason behind my faith because of my dad, and I also wanted to make some sense of why he didn't believe, why my mom did, etc. That led me eventually to theology, and specifically to Catholic social teaching, which is a subset of the Church's moral theology that speaks specifically about kind of the crosshairs between economics and faith and social science and politics and art and culture and all the things is all part of Catholic social teaching, and I was drawn to that because of my background, and that's kind of what I do. In a lot of different places in the country, I give talks about Catholic social teaching, and it was actually because I was giving a talk to some business folks here in town that I was invited to come here. Also because I paid Marlo. No, I'm joking, that's fine. So one of the things that social teaching does for us, I like to say, is the social teaching helps us to know how to be Catholic the other 6 days of the week. So on Sundays, we know we're supposed to go to Mass, as I'm sure many of you did, right? But then how do I be Catholic all the other days until next Sunday? That's kind of what the social teaching is supposed to help us do. And one of the things that the Church talks about in the context of social teaching is that we tend to have, maybe it's a Western thing, maybe it's just an American thing, but I think it's a human thing in general, we tend to live what the Church calls a divided life, which is not a complicated concept. Right? We have our faith life over here, and then we have our family life over here, and sometimes that's divided. We'll talk about that later. And then we have our work life over here, and then our friend life over here, and maybe there's a hobby life or something elsewhere, but all those aspects of our life, they don't always interact with each other. And then the difficulty, of course, is the thing that's supposed to be at the very center of our lives, our faith, right, doesn't touch those other parts. Which is not to say, by the way, this is not a seminar on how to teach your coworkers how to pray the rosary. This is not to say that somehow you have to forcibly inject your faith in these other aspects. What I want to be able to do, maybe hopefully this evening, is to show how what you do right now in your families, in your work, with your friendships, what you do right now, that the Lord is already working in those places. And that we just have to learn how to see and cooperate with that work that's already happening, if that makes sense. That's kind of what I want to be able to do. This idea of the faith imbuing all the things in our lives is not something I've come up with. This is not a Deacon Omar thing. This is just what the Church has taught for a long time. There's a great saint, St. Francis de Sales, 1500s, 1600s. He's writing to a mom, a lady who wants to grow in her spiritual life. And he tells her this in this book. He says, I'm quoting, he says, "It's an error, nay, a very heresy, nay, We should use nay more. Nay and smite. We should use nay and smite more often now, I think. Those are great old words. Anyway, sorry. I get distracted and then focus. Okay, so it's an error, nay, a very heresy, he says, to seek to banish the devout life. So the devout life is the pursuit of holiness. Okay? It's an error, nay, a very heresy, to banish the devout life from the soldier's guardroom, from the mechanic's workshop, from the prince's court, or the domestic hearth. It's a heresy to say that somehow the soldier, and I know there's a lot of military families here or former military here at St. Columbkille, to say that the soldier has to get outside of being a soldier before he can pursue holiness. No, it's a heresy. That's a heresy. You can find holiness within where the Lord has you, not in spite of. Within the mechanic's workshop or the programmer's cubicle, right? Within the prince's court, within the politician's office of the law firm, and within the domestic hearth, within your home, within your family. You can find holiness there. That's the church's teaching. So how does that begin to happen? How do we do that? I'm going to share a story from Mother Teresa. I'm going to share a couple of them, but this one was told to me by a friend here in Omaha. He used to work with the homeless in New York back in the 90s, and you may recall, some of you, then Mother Teresa visiting the United States way back then, and she had gone to this homeless shelter he was working at, and you can imagine the scene. There's little Mother Teresa, and everybody at the shelter sort of gathered around, and there's a very sincere lady says to Mother, she says, "Oh, Mother, we love you so much because everywhere you go, you bring peace." It's beautiful, right? And then Mother looks at them and she says, "Everywhere I go, I bring work." Everywhere I go, I bring work. Right? I think that's a funny story because as Americans, we tend to think of work as something bad. We don't like work. Work is the thing we do so we don't have to. Work is, oftentimes actually we see it as a punishment. We think that work was a punishment from God because of the fall of Adam and Eve. And actually that's not true. If you go back to the second creation story, when God creates Adam, and by the way, so that between the first and second creation story, God sort of gets down, and the image in the story, go read it again, he kind of gets down and he shapes Adam like God has hands. God's a worker. He shapes Adam, and he breathes life into Adam, and then he places Adam in a garden, and then he gives Adam a job. That's the first thing he does, he gives him work. And he says, your job is to protect and till this garden. So right off the bat, physical work, before the fall. Then he notices that it's not good for man to be alone, and so he starts making animals. The scene here, by the way, is one of the funniest things ever. So here's Adam. God notices he doesn't have a helpmate, right? And so he says, so I'm going to give you some animals. So he makes the animals, and he goes over to Adam, and he says, is this it? And then Adam names the animal, and then says, no, that's not. So here's the image, right? God brings it, and he's like, what about this? He's like, no, giraffe. And then the next thing is like, what about this? No, penguin, and then moves on, right? So the second work is intellectual work, the naming. So physical work, intellectual work, and then he puts Adam to sleep. He creates Eve. Adam sees her, and what's his first words? At last. You can almost feel the relief. Right? And then it says, for this reason a man shall leave his father and mother and cling to his wife, and the two shall become one. Right? There's emotional work to be done too. The at last and the clinging. So physical work, intellectual work, emotional work. All of that before the fall. That's what the Lord gives us, this gift of work. And we tend not to want to deal with it. We want to avoid it. We want to say that somehow work is something that gets in the way. It's an obstacle to our growing in holiness, when in point of fact, actually, it can be the very means for how we become holy. All right. The second Mother Teresa story that I have, there's a fellow by the name of Dr. Mike Naughton. He runs an institute in Catholic social teaching up in the Twin Cities. Really great guy, intelligent guy. He before he did this institute, he would do sort of business consultation with various businesses. He was invited to India to talk to some businesses at a conference. And the guy who was organizing the conference, who's not Catholic himself, but knew that Mike Naughton is, said, hey, I know Mother Teresa. We help fund some of her work. Would you like to meet her? And Mike said, of course, I'd love to meet her. So he goes and meets Mother Teresa, and they have a nice little chat. And then as he's leaving, Mother says, let me give you my business card. Because of course she has a business card, right? So he takes the business card, right? But the business card doesn't have her name on it, doesn't have a phone number or a fax or whatever. This is what it says. The fruit of silence is prayer. The fruit of prayer is faith. The fruit of faith is love. The fruit of love is service. And the fruit of service is peace. I'm going to say that again, slightly different. Silence leads to prayer. Prayer leads to faith. Faith leads to love. Love leads to service. Service leads to peace. One more time. Silence, prayer, faith, love, service, peace. What's so beautiful about that for me is that Mother understands the end goal here is peace. Peace. When we talk about the Christian life and what we're going for and what holiness is, what does that really mean? I mean, it means getting to heaven, okay, fine, but what does heaven mean? I mean, it's outside of time. Well, how do I really understand that? Or sometimes we use the word happiness, right? In fact, Thomas Aquinas says the point of the moral life is happiness, but happiness is one of those words that can mean all kinds of different things. Right? Last night, my daughter, I went to a play. She was in a play. Some of you maybe were there too. And I was happy that she could be on stage and doing something she loves with friends that she loves. That made me happy. Right? Bourbon also makes me happy, right? Just so you know, right? Lots of things make me happy, right? But not in the same way, obviously. I'd be in trouble if it did. But my point is that happiness is this term that means so many other things. What the Jews understood and what we teach is that ultimately, right, heaven, happiness is peace. Peace. When the Jews, greet each other, shalom means peace, like that, the ultimate peace. That sense of being able to be happy, if you will, no matter what is happening in our lives. There's a great cardinal who's passed away many years now. He was very much involved in the social teaching of the church. His name was Cardinal Francis Xavier Nguyen Van Thuan. He's Vietnamese. Incredibly brilliant guy, handsome beyond belief. He's one of those guys who knew 8 languages, right, fluently. Those jerks, right? And he had 3 doctorates by the time he was 25. He's one of those guys. He became the auxiliary archbishop of Saigon, and then Saigon fell to the Viet Cong and the communists, and they arrested him. And then he spent the next 13 years in a Vietnamese prison, 9 of which were in solitary confinement. Now, why solitary confinement? Because while he was being jailed by the communists, he kept converting the guards. Yeah, they're like, we gotta get this guy away from everybody else because he keeps converting them, right? That's peace. That's peace. Now people would bring him pieces of paper, and he would write down encouraging messages for people outside of the Vietnamese prison, because he was so much at peace. It didn't matter what was going on. He could still love the Lord because he was grounded. Peace. Now, Mother Teresa says that peace is the result of the fruit of service, and service is a kind of work. So how is our work, or how can our work be service? Let me give you an example from history, and then maybe some sort of concrete ideas. Here in Omaha, we're blessed with this University of Nebraska, Omaha. I'm the deacon at the Newman Center here in town. I get to interact with a lot of the students who are there at the Newman Center and go to the school. And there's a professor at the university. She's in the history department. Her name is Dr. Martina Saltamacchia. She's Italian, in case you were wondering. From Italy, like legit, with the accent and everything. And when she was getting her doctorate was on the building of the cathedral in Milan. Now, I don't know what you think. It's a huge cathedral. It looks like 300 years to build. The Notre Dame's been in the news a lot lately. Similar, huge structure. Beautiful, beautiful, right? And a lot of people think that the cathedral would have been built by these wealthy people, trying to aggrandize themselves. But what she found in her research was that actually the cathedral was built, the vast majority of the money that built the cathedral came from tiny little donations from average and the poor. That's how it was built. But at the very beginning, that's not how it started. At the very beginning, the Duke of Milan, who nobody liked apparently, wanted to aggrandize himself and ingratiate himself with the people in the surrounding areas. So he's the one who decided we're going to build a cathedral, big cathedral, put Milan on the map, make sure everybody sort of recognizes us. And so he's the one who decided the idea. So they put together a committee and they started digging out the foundation of the cathedral, and he gave this huge donation. My image in my own mental imagination of this is his walking down the streets of Milan with a gigantic check attached to a donkey or something and a bell saying, look at me, I'm doing, that's my own problem. All right, anyway, so he gets to the center and he donates this big amount and they're building the foundation. But then after, let's say, a year or so, however it took it to dig out the foundation, he said, I don't want to give any more money. I'm done giving money. People don't like me enough yet, or whatever his problem was. He said he's done. But they're in a pickle, right? Because they can't just stop. If they stop, then the weather will wash out all the work they've done. They have to continue, but where are they going to get the money? Well, they decided to go to a man named Marco. So I'll pause in the story here in a second. I'll tell you about Marco. All this, by the way, is Dr. Saltamacchia's research. She finds out that Marco was born in Milan, the 1300s. His dad was a merchant there. He and his dad have a falling out, and so he leaves Milan and goes to find his fortune in Venice, right? And he goes there, and in Venice, while he's there, there's this spice that comes in, the brand new spice. Nobody's ever heard of this spice before. And so he sees an opportunity, and he buys up all the spice on this ship, like hundreds of these little barrels of this spice, right? And then he takes that spice and he sends it all over Italy and charges a ridiculous amount of money for it because he's taking the risk, right? And that spice today is one of the signature spices of Northern Italian cuisine. Nutmeg. Nutmeg. So he makes a killing, goes back to Milan, takes over the business from his dad, diversifies into real estate and loans and textiles, etc. Big wig, never married, no kids. All right, so go back to the story of the cathedral. Marco had already promised that when he died, he was going to leave a big sum of money to the cathedral project. So the bishop and the people in the committee said, we need to go to Marco and ask him, you're not dead, but can we have that money now, please? Right? A difficult conversation. God bless them for having that, right? So they go to Marco and they ask for the money, and Marco says, give me a couple days. And he comes back to them and he says, fine, I'll give it to you. I'll give you everything. And he gives them everything. I think except for his own house, he gives them everything he has. In the history of the building of that cathedral was the single largest donation of the cathedral. Now this is my favorite part. So what happened to Marco? Did he go off, become a priest, join a monastery, travel the world? What did he do? You know what he did? He started another business. Because that's what he is. He's a businessman. He understood that the gifts God had gave him were for that specific work. And so he just continued to work because he understood that his work is not an obstacle to his pursuit of holiness. His work is precisely how he gets to where the Lord wants him to be. He has to be available to the cathedral project, but available to anybody and everybody else. And it's not just that one thing Marco did. He was also involved with the efforts in the city, when the bishop and the mayor and he and other business people would get together on some regular annual basis and say, how can we help out the city? What are the problems of the city? What can we do to be working together so we can help make the lives of the people in Milan better? That's Marco. How do we see work as service? We be more like Marco and understand that our work is actually a path for us to be holy. And what's the other way? There's this beautiful document that comes from the church, from the Church of Social Teaching. It came out in 2012, and it talks specifically about this very question. How can we understand work, particularly business, let's say, to be a help? I'm going to quote from the document. It says this. It says, when businesses and markets as a whole are functioning properly, they make an irreplaceable contribution to the material and even spiritual well-being of humankind. When businesses work properly, they contribute to the spiritual benefit of humankind. How is that possible? Well, they tell you. In the very next paragraph, it says, while the family is the first school of society, and the family is, while the family is the first school of society, business, like many other social institutions, continues to educate people in virtue. Businesses, workplaces, schools, institutions, they have cultures. And cultures either encourage virtue or they don't. Businesses, when run properly, could be the places where virtue can grow, where we can make a real difference. As our young people, they're trying to figure out what it means to be themselves. Once they're outside of the family and outside of school, and now they're in the workplace. Culture. Those of you who might be in business or in management maybe have heard this phrase, right? Culture eats strategy for breakfast. Ever heard that phrase before? No. You can have the best plan laid out for your business, the school, the parish, whatever it might be. But if the culture is toxic, if the people who are working together aren't on the same page, then it doesn't matter what your strategy is. Are you seeking to build virtue within your teams? Are you trying to be the kind of leader, and you don't have to be the boss, but are you trying to be the kind of leader in your sphere of influence that's going to help build virtue? The church teaches that adds to the spiritual well-being of society. Not despite your work, but precisely in your work. That's the secret. One of the best things I get to do as a deacon is do marriage prep. And one of the very first couples I worked with was a young couple, young man here from Omaha. I'll call him Ryan, because that's his name, Ryan. Ryan was his name. And Ryan went to Catholic school, right? Went to Catholic high school, then went to college, fell away from the faith, as so many kids do. Right, and then got out and then started working with an engineering place. Now his boss, a small little firm, his boss was a devout Christian fellow and would talk about his faith oftentimes at work. Right? Not in an in-your-face way or threatening, but just he would talk about the fact that he was a faithful man. And this young guy, Ryan, noticed that and he said, this guy really has it together. So maybe I should reconnect with my faith. So he started going to the Catholic young adult group here in Omaha, which is where he met his wife, and now they're married and have a couple kids, and still haven't named any of them Omar, but that's fine. It's okay. I don't blame him, truly. Yeah. So the influence that work can have on people, I don't think we always appreciate. Mother Teresa says that peace is a result of service, and service is a result of love. Fruit of love. What kind of love? I think sometimes we make love out to be this really huge thing, and we get intimidated by it because we understand God's love for us, and we think, I can't love like that, God. But just hear me out here for a second. There's a story that you've heard before. I'm going to try to unpack it maybe a little bit in a way maybe you haven't heard before, but it's the story of Peter and Jesus on the shore of the Sea of Galilee. So this is after the resurrection has happened. Right? They already know this. A bunch of the apostles, they go back up to Galilee, right? And they say, let's go fish. So they go fish, right? Jesus appears on the shore and says, go fish again. And so they pull this huge net, right? They drag it onto the shore. It's John. This story appears in John's gospel, by the way. It's John who says, it's Jesus. It's the Lord. So Peter gets out of the boat. He waits up, and there's Jesus on the shore cooking fish. Because I guess being God makes you hungry. I don't know. Why is he cooking fish? But he is. He's eating the fish. John actually says, by the way, they finished the meal. Right? So they all eat together. And then this is the scene where Jesus asks Peter 3 times, Peter, do you love me? Right? Now this is the first time the two of them have had any kind of long exchange since Peter denied him 3 times. And so Jesus gives him three opportunities. Now, you may have heard some of this before. When Jesus says, Peter, do you love me? He uses a Greek word that means sort of big love, right? Self-emptying, earth-shattering, total love, agape. Right? But then when Peter responds, he doesn't use the same word. He says, Lord, you know I love you. He uses a different word, philia, which is brotherly love, fraternal love. Okay, so I just want to pause there for a second. What's Peter's MO in the Gospels? He's a knucklehead, right? Peter is constantly going overboard. Right? Peter's the guy who's like on Mount Tabor or the Transfiguration. This is great. We should build some stuff. Right? Peter's the guy who takes the sword and cuts off the servant's ear. Peter's the guy who says, don't just wash my feet, wash my whole face. Like, Peter's the guy, right, who's constantly going overboard. I can't let you die. You're not going to die. Peter at the Last Supper says, I'm never going to deny you, ever. I'm the best. Right? That's always Peter, leaning over his skis. Right? And here, finally, here he is, and the Lord asks him, do you love me, big love, up here? And Peter says, I love you here. This is what I got. So Jesus asked him a second time, Peter, do you love me? Big love? A second time, Peter says, I love you here. And then Jesus says a third time, Peter, do you love me? But the third time Jesus asks, he says, do you love me down here? And Peter, in the text, says he's upset. He says, Lord, you know everything. I love you down here. This is the best I got. So don't be intimidated by what you think the Lord wants of you in terms of love. He'll meet you where you're at. He'll meet you where you're at. If all you can muster is fraternal love, being civil, right? Being kind, if that's the best you can do, great. Now, what's beautiful, though, is then the next thing Jesus says to Peter is, basically predicts his death, right? His martyrdom eventually. Eventually you're going to be led where you don't want to go. And John actually says in the text, Jesus was talking about Peter's death. So Jesus says to Peter, you love me here, you're going to love me up here eventually. It's going to happen. You're going to love me big love. But I'll meet you here. So Jesus will meet us there. He always will. One of the things I wanted to sort of emphasize this evening was the striving. St. Paul in 1 letter Corinthians chapter 12 lists these various spiritual gifts of the Holy Spirit. And then at the end, though, he says, but there's still a greater one. Before that, he says, in verse 31, he says, strive eagerly for the greatest spiritual gifts. Strive eagerly for the greatest spiritual gifts. And then he says, but I still know a better way. And then that's when he gets into the love is kind, love is patient, that everybody has at their weddings, right? That's where that is, in that section of his letter, okay? So Paul, who was a bit of a jerk early on in his life, right? Paul eventually understands that you can have all the head knowledge, you can have any speaking gifts, as he clearly had, right? But at the end of the day, it really comes down to that love. To love. So Mother Teresa says, right, peace is a result of service, service is a result of love, love is the fruit of faith. What kind of faith? What do we mean by faith? The first thing is faith that God cares. Faith, belief that God really cares. And when we're having difficult times, when we have struggles, when we have various distractions, it can be very difficult to believe that God cares. And in fact, for me, and I'll go back to my growing up, right, this is one of the things I asked so much about my dad and why he didn't believe, etc. My dad suffered terribly at the hands of his own parents, but also at the hands of the church. And it was hard for him to believe that the church cared. Very hard. For me, though, the proof of that caring God is right here, right? That's what demonstrates that God cares. But if even Christ's sacrifice on the cross is too much, here we have an Advent, this wonderful opportunity. We have an Advent, this wonderful opportunity where the Prince of Peace will appear before us as this little babe in a manger with his mom and his dad in absolute poverty. And that's a sign that God cares as well. That he cares so much for us that he's willing to be that vulnerable for us and to us. And every parent in this room knows the feeling, right, when you hold your firstborn especially, and that first time. And then you're like, we get to leave the hospital with this one? Like they're going to let us take this home? Like, me? Like, do they know who I am? Right. That's how much God cares. Because he gave us his son. All right. Second faith, we believe that God cares. We also need to believe that God will provide. That he will provide the kind of love that he's going to provide to Peter at the end. He's going to provide the kind of love that we need to have to love in holiness. He will provide that eventually. We need to believe that I'll be okay. I need to believe that I'll be okay. The Lord sees me, not just humanity, right? But that he sees Omar. I need to believe that. You need to believe that. And you need to believe that he has you where you're at for a reason. Even if it's not where you're going to stay, you're where you're at for a reason. You need to believe that, because it's reality. And we have to have faith that our loved ones will be okay. And this brings me back to what I said before. At the very beginning, I talked about the divided life, and I said, one of the areas of divided life is family, and sometimes family can be divided. I don't necessarily mean like marital strife. What I mean is, and everybody who's a family knows this, there's the kind of family time where like you're together, especially like at Thanksgiving, maybe it was recent time where we're together, maybe we're playing games, we're interacting with each other, we're having fun, right? That's what we understand to be family, right? But that's not most of the time. Most of the time, right, family is, where's the shoe? We need to get to Mass, and where for the love of God is that shoe that was just there moments ago and I told you to go get 15 minutes ago, and now we're going to be late, right? That's mostly family life. Somebody needs to be somewhere at a certain time. Who's going to make that happen? That's often family life. And that doesn't sound very fun, because it's not. It's work. Right? We need to have faith that God's there too. That he's going to provide us with those times to be close to each other. To feel each other's pain and support each other in love. We need to have that faith too. Faith, says Mother Teresa, is the fruit of prayer. And prayer is a difficult thing to explain. So for the next 30 minutes, I'm joking, I'm not going to do that. Just briefly about prayer, which is the most important thing. But because prayer looks so different for so many different people, I'll just share a couple thoughts. This is from St. Therese of Lisieux, The Little Flower. This is in the Catechism, you can go look it up. This is her definition of prayer. She starts out by saying this: "For me, which I'm just going to pause right there, right? She's a Carmelite nun who's like prayed forever, right? Has a whole bunch of Carmelite older sisters, and she starts this definition of prayer like, for me, imagine the humility, right? This is just prayer for me. It doesn't have to be prayer for you, but for me, this is what it is. Prayer is a surge of the heart. Prayer is a surge of the heart. It's a simple look turned towards heaven. It is a cry of recognition and of love, embracing both trial and joy. Prayer is a surge of the heart. So what's prayer? Sometimes I think that prayer is a kind of a physical work almost. Right? Got to say the beads, or got to sit down with the breviary, or I got to set up the space, right? Or it's a mental work, an intellectual work. I got to be focused. I got to meditate on the right things, right? Prayer, more than anything else, is emotional work. Because prayer is relationship. Prayer is hard. It's not you. It's prayer. Prayer is hard because it requires us to be habituated to the movements of God in our hearts. And if we're not habituated to those movements, if we're not used to paying attention to what's going on in here, then prayer, as St. Therese says, prayer, when it surges, we might not always see. We might not always hear. When I was telling the story about being annoyed, are you annoyed yet? Being annoyed by me, right? It was Uncle Bob, right? What was the stirring? Right? The stirring happens in the heart. That's where it happens. And if I'm not paying attention to what's going on here, then prayer's going to be a lot harder. So prayer takes work, and some of the work that's happening here at St. Columbkille, the little I've heard already from Arlo, the work here is to try to help us learn how to walk with others and paying attention to what's going on here. And Father said at the very beginning, right? What's the good of talking about Christ's birth in this world in Bethlehem if he's not also living here in our hearts? If we can turn our hearts over to the Lord, that'll lead to all the other things about faith and love and service and peace. But that's hard. It takes practice. But once again, sometimes it's simpler than we think. So I'm going to end with just a couple of points here. There's a beautiful saint, Saint Frances of Rome. It's a she. It's Frances, Frances of Rome. She's in Italy. She's married. She has a couple kids. She lost a couple kids. She's a beautiful saint to pray to, by the way. Her husband, who she eventually loses, but they have a great relationship, a very loving relationship. And the story is this: she sat down. Her husband's a nobleman, so they have a household to run, and she's the matron of the household. And she sits down to pray, right? Which right away says she has a set time and a set place where she prays. And she prays a specific way. So she has a habit already. She prays this old thing called the Office of Our Lady, but it's basically there's a little antiphon and a psalm or a prayer, whatever, and it goes on. Anyway, so she sits down to pray, and she starts the first antiphon. And the door knocks, and somebody from the kitchen comes up. There's a problem in the kitchen. You need to come fix the problem. She says, all right, fine. Puts down the book. She goes down the kitchen, solves the problem. Comes back, sits down, opens the thing, starts saying the first antiphon. Door knocks again. Somebody comes in and says, your husband needs to talk to you. I apologize, but can't. Okay, so she puts it down. She goes and meets with her husband. This happens 3 more times. Sits down, tries to read the antiphon, gets interrupted. The last time she sits down, she looks at her book and she starts to read the antiphon, but the antiphon's no longer written in black ink, it's written in gold lettering. And the Lord says to her, I did this because you answered my call. I did this for you because you lived your vocation. Yeah, I would love for you to pray to me, but you're a wife and you're a mom, you're the head of this household, people need you. You did what you were supposed to do. And you did it with love. And that's what I want. Prayer can be just answering the call of the Lord in the moment. Prayer can be just doing what you're doing in the moment and offering it up to the Lord. My wife and I, when we had our son, Carlos, who's now 19 and in college and all those things, when he would run with his hands on his cheeks because his cheeks bounced so much. And he figured, I think, that if he held on to him, he'd be more aerodynamic. I'm not sure exactly what the idea was. But when he ran, I always noticed this, when he ran, he would run, and then he'd always be looking behind us to make sure we were watching. Right? See me? See what I'm doing? See how fast I'm going? Right. Prayer can just be doing what the Lord has you doing in the moment and saying, look, Father, look what I'm doing. I'm doing this for you. Whether it's doing the dishes or TPS reports or whatever it is that you do, offering it up to the Father. That can be simple prayer. Last couple of things. St. Gregory the Great, one of the great popes, had this motto, which one of these days I'm going to put up in my office. And this is the Latin. It says, Age quod agis. Age quod agis. Do what you are doing. Do what you are doing. I just think that's so beautiful and so wise. Instead of wishing I could be doing something more, something else, so I wish I could be serving the church this way. Maybe the service is this thing right in front of you. And you just offer that up to the Father. So how do we strive? How do we pursue holiness in our everyday lives? That's how we offer all the little things we have to the Father in love. Amen? Amen. Basta così. Thank you so much for having me. If there are any questions, I suppose, I don't know if we wanted to do that, but if there are any questions or thoughts or confusions, any criticisms, you can see someone else for those, but I do want to offer some of that time. Or I know there's a reception afterwards, you can come talk to me afterwards, but God bless you. Thank you.
Well, we're not going to go quite yet. We're going to give our food team a little time to set up out downstairs before we go. But first, I'd like to personally thank Deacon Omar for this time. I heard this, I had the honor of hearing him speak several months ago, and it struck me then, and it strikes me even a different chord today. I'd like to go out on a limb and also thank Becca, because we're going to use you up before you go off to college as much as possible. But if you would do me a favor and come back to the piano, we're going to sing one more time before we go, because that's what we do here at St. Columbkille. Yeah. Two verses. Okay, so before she starts, though, I just want to give a little talk, because I was very much moved by this. And I was moved for St. Columbkille. I was thinking about the fruits of the prayer that was offered to us by Mother Teresa. And I love Mother Teresa because she lived in the time in which I've lived. And it gives me hope that I can also be like her, even just a little. And it is a little. But this is what I thought of for St. Columbkille. All the fruits that we offer that so many take advantage of. The fruit of silence is in our chapel or in an adoration that so many people come to. We have opportunities for prayer all the time. We have a prayer box right back there. You can put your prayers in there. We ask for prayers on the altar to pray for our community, for our world. We have prayers of the rosary. We have a prayer line, hotline. We pray at St. Columbkille. We have faith that comes in a lot of different ways, but one of the most active ways is when we're all here in church together, celebrating the Mass. And it's a celebration together, not alone. our love. I think we have so much love at this church and for each other. And it happens in reconciliation. So please come these next couple of nights that are specific. We have love when we make a meal for someone else. We help others. Our service is extraordinary. And in all the ways in which we do service in our parish, whether it's the helping hands of people who were downstairs earlier today, taking in the donations that our community so generously gave. If it was the overfull list of people that signed up to help in one way or another tonight, I don't know if we've ever filled up so quickly with volunteers. So thank you. And also, it's our generosity of gifts. And I think from that, here at St. Columbkille, we have peace when we're together. And we have that peace of the Lord. So thank you. And if you'd like to join and sing along, please open your books to Song 39. And then lastly, I'd just like to thank our fathers for saying yes to this evening. I'd like to thank those that are in small groups for the love that you give your people that you meet with once a month, and also for all of the volunteers, because there is just no way this could have happened. And then next year when we do an Advent speaker, just invite someone to come so that we have a full church. Although this is more than what we prayed for. So this is wonderful. The Lord is so good to us.
Come